And one thing I counsel companies with is to say, listen, don't just be sort of a hammer looking for a nail. In other words, yes, the tools are there, but you don't want to just use the tools for the tool's sake. You want to actually be able to solve a problem that you would not be able to solve but for the use of these AI tools. And that's a different way to think about it with respect to deploying them in ways that can really enhance your productivity. I mean, it is literally the wild, wild west. I'm seeing right now when I am watching the early stages of AI a few years ago to the quality of what can be produced now. We're going to get very, very soon, Dan, we're going to get to a point where you will not be able to tell the difference between an AI-generated creative piece of output and something real.
Welcome to The Ripple Effect, the podcast that takes you on a journey through the minds of Wharton faculty. I'm your host, Dan Loney, and in each episode, we'll be diving deep into the inspiration behind the groundbreaking research that Wharton professors have conducted and exploring how their findings resonate with the world today. So many things being discussed and how AI is impacting them right now. One area that we're going to talk about right now is the world of marketing and the use of visuals in advertising. This obviously, from the advertiser's perspective, helps them save money and time in production, but is it the right way to go about this when you're talking about that connection to the consumer? And how much should the public know about how much AI is being used in the advertisements they see? Pleasure to be joined by our friend Americus Reed, professor of management here at the Wharton School and co-host of the Marketing Matters podcast on the Wharton Podcast Network. AR, good to talk to you again. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Dan. Happy New Year to you. Very excited for this conversation.
Thank you. All right. So we're early in 2026. As we are talking here right now, how much AI is involved in marketing and advertising at the moment?
Well, I love that question, Dan. I think that what we're seeing right now, and this is amazing to me to watch, is that there is an incredible trajectory of accelerated participation and use of AI. Dan, it's the Wild West. Everyone is jumping in on this, and the parameters are being discussed and framed out as we go. And so what I'm seeing, especially with smaller companies, is that there is this leveling up, just like you just said, where you're able to do things that you could not do as a small company in terms of cost prohibitive, creative that you can create now using these types of tools. And so we're going to continue to see smaller companies really trying to reach that same level of quality in the creative that the bigger companies can see. And on the consumer side, just like you're saying, consumers are aware that these are tools that are in use from a marketing perspective, certainly with respect to actually creating advertisements, messaging, things like that, but also on the back end with respect to the research that has to get done to understand what consumers want and to do the typical types of things that we do as marketers. So these tools are there. And in my point of view, there's no choice but to take on these tools and dive in and try to learn how you can best be productive using these tools.
So you mentioned the research side. How much are you doing that with your work at the moment so that you can best understand where that right level is, so that you're getting the message across, but you're also not impeding the consumer as well?
Yeah, I love that question, Dan. I've said this, even in my own work, I was hesitant because, I am a digital immigrant. And so all of these things are just wildly new to me. And so, but even in my work as a professor, I've had to force myself to lean in on these tools to help me write and come up with ideas, to have an agent that can go out and do research on my behalf and to help me form my ideas, articulate my ideas, get structure around my ideas. In the classroom, it's happening with respect to my interactions and engagement with the students. It is totally there. And so, as I said, there's no choice. It would be like, man, product services organizations saying to themselves in 1995, you know what? Let's skip this whole internet thing. Let's not jump in. You can't do it. AI is this next milestone. It is this thing. We're all going to have to use it. And, we're just going to have to get over that threshold of fear and jump in and start trying to use these tools. And every day I seem to wake up, Dan, there's a new set of tools that are being introduced to me, a new brand, a new product platform of AI machinery that is, entering into my space. And so I
Yeah.
have to figure out, even in my own world, what are the tools I need to level up on my skill sets. And I've already started that process.
You mentioned a moment ago big business versus small business in terms of the use of these tools in marketing. So it would seem to me that this is a great opportunity for smaller businesses to play catch up and to be able to play on the same playing field, to be able to level up with some businesses in their specific sector because of how AI can give them a boost.
That's 100% correct. And I love this because to me, what's happening here as a marketplace change, Dan, is the idea that everyone has to get better. And that's actually ultimately better for the consumer. If smaller companies can compete with larger companies and there's more competition and there's parity with respect to brands, product, service organizations from innovative, smaller startup types of companies competing with the big guys,
Mhm.
that's a good thing. And so we're seeing right now many of these companies starting that process of figuring out how to bring these tools into the play. And so what I think is critical about this, Dan, is that one of the things that I am noticing here that's very, very important is this idea of the question of how do I use these tools? And
Right.
one thing I counsel companies with is to say, listen, don't just be sort of a hammer looking for a nail. In other words, yes, the tools are there, but you don't want to just use the tools for the tool's sake. You want to actually be able to solve a problem that you would not be able to solve but for the use of these AI tools. And
Right.
that's a different way to think about it with
Right.
respect to deploying them in ways that can really enhance your productivity.
Well, and probably is something that up until what, maybe 5, 10 years ago, companies really didn't even probably put that into the mix to begin with, right?
That's 100% correct. And like now I mean, it is literally the wild, wild west. I'm seeing right now when I am watching the early stages of AI a few years ago to the quality of what can be produced now, we're
Yeah.
going to get very, very soon, Dan, we're going to get to a point where you will not be able to tell the difference between an AI generated creative piece of output
Right.
and something real. And that's scary because now we're talking about affecting consumers. We're talking about how do you deploy these tools in an ethical way? How do you stop misinformation? How do you make sure that you're doing these things the right way? And so this is going to be opening up a whole plethora of regulatory issues, companies' best practices. And right now, I'm not aware of any sort of like focused parameters that are being put out there. So it's all sort of forming in real time, and we'll see how this all plays out. But there's no question in my mind that if you are a product, brand, service, or organization, you have to start using these tools.
All right. So you kind of answered what I wanted to talk about next in terms of best practices. But do you think it's a necessity to have kind of a, whether it's not official rules, but kind of best practices guidelines that companies kind of try to adhere to so that they are delivering the message that they want to, but at the same time, they're not infringing on the consumer's life, their territory.
I love that point, Dan. I think that that's a critical question that basically is at the crux of the issue here,
Right.
right? When we're thinking about how do consumers respond to these types of creatives
Right.
and creative output, do they look at this and say like, this is not authentic, it's made up, it's fakery, or do they look at this and say, hey, that's pretty cool? And
Right.
so I think the answer to that is it depends on how it's deployed, right? So if you're Coca-Cola and you're making AI generated ads, it might be a very different reaction, let's say,
Right.
from the point of view of the consumer in terms of a smaller sort of company. So there's nuance here. In other words, how do I deploy the tool? How do I make sure I'm deploying the tool in a way that ensures that the consumer understands that I know what they detect as real and not real, and that they understand I'm using these tools to create deeper connections, more resonant connections, especially with younger consumers, perhaps, and that these tools can help me do that. But just using these tools to be using the tools is probably not as, let's say, efficient and desirable as really saying, you know what, I have a specific issue of an ad I need to create, and AI is going to help me do this to really facilitate my brand, to facilitate the meaning system around my brand. And AI
Right.
can help me do this in a way that I would not be able to do otherwise. So I'm going to deploy it.
But because there is so much AI content kind of out there right now, and it seems like it
Yes.
grows every day. And for many of us, a lot of that AI content has a level of humor to it.
Yes.
Do marketers benefit from the fact that there seems to be that connection between AI and humor right now, and it will benefit them if they go that route with the messages that they are trying to deliver?
I think you're touching on something that's a really important insight here, Dan, and that is to say yes. The answer to that is yes. In other words, the expectation of AI and humor, there's a natural synchronicity there, right?
Yeah,
And we're
yeah,
all seeing the funny memes that are coming out
sure,
that are so fantastical. It blows your mind, right? Whether it be President Trump and the former president of Venezuela crip walking together,
yeah,
or whatever it is. It's
yeah.
one of these things that is hilarious. And so humor, I love your point, Dan.
Rocky and Apollo Creed, except it's Trump and Maduro.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But here's something that's really deep and an insight that you just pointed to. It's like the humor is a natural gateway into this, right? So it's a safe way to kind of expose people to these tools and your use of these tools as a product, brand, service, or organization in a way that doesn't potentially have the same backlash that you might have with respect to something that you would purport is an actual kind of real thing that's happening.
Right.
So if they know it's fantastical, then you get a sort of get out of jail free card, if you will, in terms of deploying that kind of thing. And that's one of the nice things about using humor as part of the way to create that familiarity and safety with with the consumer, so that they can trust what you're doing with respect to when you execute on these types of creative efforts later on down the road.
So the understanding that the public has currently about the use of AI in marketing efforts, do you know yet whether it tends to occur better with younger generations, digital natives, than older generations, or is everybody kind of picking up on what is going on right now?
I love that point. I think the answer is the latter. I think everyone is attuned to, because of what you had mentioned with respect to the proliferation of AI in the humorous, comedic kind of setting, that people are aware of this. I would think that younger consumers have a more, let's say, built-in kind of familiarity with these sorts of tools because they're growing up swiping left and right and things of that nature.
Right.
But I think there is still, again, this notion of the more and more proliferation of these AI tools that happens out there, Dan, across generations of consumers, the less it becomes differentiated. And so there's a challenge there, because once everyone starts using these tools, then everything level sets and it's sort of like the same. So the question becomes, how do I differentiate my specific use of these tools in ways that elevate my brand above competition? And that's going to be where the people who are most creative, the genuine, authentic narrative storytellers are going to be able to really elevate, because they're going to understand how to use these tools to create trust and resonance and brand connection with both younger and older consumers. And
Right.
we're going to wait until that happens with respect to the market kind of shaking out with respect to the tools themselves, but also the products, brand, services, and organizations that are using these tools.
So, as a professor and as a researcher, are there elements that you are most interested to see how they develop within this entire AI growth marketing process?
Yeah, I think so. Again, there's two areas that I'm interested in. One is on the side of the creating the intelligence that allows us to understand and predict how consumers are going to react to the types of things we would like to do as a brand, product, service, or organization. That's on this sort of gathering information and understanding the consumer side. And
Right.
then on the other side, executing on creating messages, advertisements, promotional kinds of things that can really elevate on the creative side as well. So I think there's going to be a convergence
Yeah.
of these two areas happening within the context of those marketers that are savvy enough and smart enough to jump on this train now and to start figuring out how to use these tools in the best ways that we've been talking about in this conversation.
I'll finish up with this question because you just mentioned brand, and brand is something that you and I have talked about a lot, especially in recent years. All of this that is being done, all of this that is being advanced, still has to be done with the brand at the forefront of the thought process, because the last thing a company wants to do is do something that is going to really put a hurt on their brand, even with this advanced technology.
That's 100% correct, right? And so I love that point because it points to, for example, we talked about the Coca-Cola ads that have been coming out. A Porsche came out with an ad that they literally came out and said, this was not made with AI.
Right.
And, it's been going viral because of that. So it really illustrates the point that you're making, Dan, which is that, again, you don't want to just use this tool for the tool's sake.
Yeah.
You definitely want to use the tool, but you want to use the tool in service of elevating the brand, keeping things consistent, making sure synchronicity is there, making sure that you're able to use these tools in ways that create resonance that you would not otherwise be able to do if you weren't using these tools. And if you're thinking about it from that focus point of view, you probably aren't going to get into any trouble.
Americus, always fun to chat with you, my friend.
I appreciate you, sir. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Americus Reed, professor of marketing here at the Wharton School. And of course, as you can tell, for those of you watching this video on YouTube, he is the co-host of Marketing Matters right there on the screen behind him with our friend Barbara Kahn every week here on the Wharton Podcast Network. Thank you for listening to The Ripple Effect. We hope you found this episode informative and engaging. Don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review so that we can continue to bring you the best insight from the Wharton School.